The warning was simple, cruel, and relentless. Challenge the West and die. Africa has heard this whisper for generations, carved into its soil with blood. Patrice Lumumba lasted only 67 days before silence swallowed his voice. Thomas Sankara, after 4 short years of audacity, was gunned down. Muammar Gaddafi, who dared to imagine a currency for the entire continent, fell to a death so cold-blooded that the world itself shivered. Each one became another reminder. Sovereignty carries a price, and the hand that strikes it down always comes from outside. Yet today, in the heart of the Sahel, another man dares to climb the same perilous hill. Ibrahim Traoré, a name once unknown, now spoken from Dakar to Nairobi, has become the youngest head of state in the world, carrying not only the weight of Burkina Faso, but the restless hopes of millions. His rise is a story of betrayal, resistance, and defiance. But is it also the seed of a different ending? Could this be the moment when history bends, when the message, challenge the West and die, is rewritten into something new? A legacy of freedom? Do not look away. What comes next may change how Africa sees itself. Subscribe and stand with us. Every revolution begins not with speeches in grand halls, but with silent witnesses on forgotten roads. For Ibrahim Traoré, the journey began in Burkina Faso's troubled northern provinces, where the dust was thick, the gunfire close, and the reality of foreign partnerships became painfully clear. As a junior officer, he saw French convoys pass through villages, not to shield the people, but to guard gold mines. He saw advisors flown in from Paris, dictating strategy as if Burkina soil were an annex of foreign territory. Decisions about life and death were taken in air-conditioned rooms far away, while soldiers on the ground buried their comrades with calloused hands and silent rage. Burkina Faso, in the 2010s, was a paradox. Beneath its soil lay riches, more than 60 tons of gold flowing out each year by 2020. Yet its people ranked near the very bottom of the Human Development Index, 182nd out of 189 nations. Life expectancy hovered just above 60 years. Barely over 1/3 of the population had access to clean water. Gold crossed borders to markets in Europe through corporations like Endeavor Mining and Avesero Gold, while the villages above these veins of wealth remained trapped in poverty. The soil gave everything. The people received almost nothing. The tide of violence rose in parallel. By 2015, extremist groups armed with weapons scattered after NATO's destruction of Libya poured into the Sahel. In January 2016, the capital itself bled, as 30 innocents were slaughtered in the splendid hotel attack in Ouagadougou. From schools to markets, from mosques to health clinics, no place was sacred. Families fled their homes, traditional chiefs lost their authority, and whole regions became no-go zones. Young men faced impossible choices: flee, join militias, or perish. For those displaced, refugee camps became the new villages, but without water, without medicine, without hope. Through these years, Rochemar Christian Kabore sat in the presidential palace, applauded in foreign capitals for implementing reforms and securing loans. Aid arrived, consultants drafted policies. Yet ordinary Burkinabe saw none of it. Their children still lacked teachers. Their farmers still lacked tools. Their soldiers still lacked equipment. When the cries grew too loud, Kabore looked outward rather than inward, and the people began to lose patience. By 2021, the streets erupted in protest, a tide of frustration demanding dignity and security. In January 2022, it was the military that answered. Paul-Henri Damiba, a lieutenant colonel, seized power from Traore, promising to restore order and sovereignty. Many, including Traore, felt relief. Perhaps, at last, a leader would place Burkina Faso before foreign interests. Yet as months passed, Damiba repeated the same script. Aid packages from abroad, advisors from Paris, strategies shaped by external hands. The young captain, who had shed blood in the north, watched as the same betrayal unfolded again. The breaking point came in September 2022, during a routine briefing. Damiba, faced with worsening insecurity, deferred once more to French military advisors on how to defend Burkina Faso territory. For Traoré, it was the final insult. He had seen comrades fall in battle. He had seen villages burned. And now he was watching sovereignty signed away with a nod of the head. That night, he met with fellow officers, men who carried the same scars, the same disappointments, the same vision. They had buried too many brothers to accept another puppet regime. On the 30th of September, the decision was made. Explosions echoed near the presidential palace. By dawn, the world awoke to the news. Burkina Faso had experienced its second coup in 9 months. On state television, a young captain, just 34 years old, stood firm, declaring the end of Damiba's rule and the beginning of something different. His name, once barely known even in Ouagadougou, was suddenly on every tongue. Ibrahim Traoré. It was not simply a coup, it was a rupture, a crack in the repeating cycle of dependency and disappointment. In that moment, to millions across Africa, Traoré became more than a soldier. He became a symbol of defiance, a seed of possibility, a question whispered from Dakar to Dar es Salaam. Could this young man chart a different road? But would this new captain truly lead a new path? Or would he, too, be swallowed by the same old script of betrayal? The world's youngest head of state did not waste time with pleasantries. Within weeks of seizing power, Ibrahim Traoré drew a line that no one expected him to cross so boldly. In December 2022, he ordered the departure of all French military forces from Burkina Faso. For decades, the tricolor had flown above bases in Ouagadougou, a constant reminder that independence was incomplete. Foreign troops had been presented as protectors, yet to many Burkinabe, they guarded mines more carefully than schools, and minerals more jealously than children. Their presence was both a security blanket and a chain. By demanding their exit, Traoré did not just change policy, he shattered psychology. The expulsion reverberated across Africa. To Paris, it was humiliation. To young Africans, it was liberation. Images of the captain in camouflage, raising his voice against the former colonial master, spread like wildfire on social media. The narrative was no longer of a fragile state begging for aid, but of a nation daring to say no. For decades, leaders had chosen the comfort of dependence, telling their people that sovereignty was impractical, even dangerous. Now, a 34-year-old had proved that courage was possible. Yet Traoré knew that tearing down was only half the battle. The other half was building. With the French departure, the search for new partners began. Russian advisors arrived in Ouagadougou, bringing training, equipment, and promises of solidarity. Chinese companies were invited to compete for infrastructure contracts long monopolized by European firms. Iranian agricultural specialists offered knowledge of irrigation, food processing, and self-sufficiency. In every handshake, Traoré repeated the same condition. Burkina Faso will work only with those who respect its sovereignty. Western media painted this shift as reckless, a young leader trading one form of dependency for another. But inside Burkina Faso, the tone was different. Villagers, who had never felt heard, now listened to speeches that spoke of dignity and pride. For the first time, they heard their leader invoke not foreign creditors, but ancestors, warriors, kings, and empires that had stood tall long before colonial lines were drawn. He told his people that the soil beneath their feet was rich enough, the hands of their farmers strong enough, the will of their youth fierce enough. What they lacked was not aid, but confidence. This message was not confined to Burkina Faso's borders. Across the Sahel, echoes of Traoré's defiance stirred something dormant. In Mali, Colonel Assimi Guida adopted the same rhetoric, rejecting dictates from Paris and Washington. In Niger, General Abdourahmane Tiani questioned uranium deals and the presence of American military bases. Out of these sparks, a flame was lit, the alliance of Sahel states. For the first time in modern history, three nations bound not only by geography, but by a shared refusal to bow, began pooling their strength. They shared intelligence, launched joint military operations, and envisioned economic integration. This was no longer a lone captain's gamble. It was becoming a regional movement, and that terrified Western capitals. European think tanks issued reports warning of a contagion effect. American officials spoke of the urgent need to contain his influence. Diplomatic pressure mounted. Sanctions followed. Ambassadors issued sharp statements about democracy, rights, and constitutional order. Western outlets rushed to reframe the story. Traoré was not a revolutionary, but merely another strongman cloaked in populist rhetoric. Headlines spoke of authoritarianism and instability, while paragraphs ignored the decades of exploitation that had produced this fury. Yet paradoxically, every sanction, every criticism seemed to fuel his legitimacy. To ordinary Africans, condemnation from Paris or Washington was not a warning sign. It was proof that Traoré was striking at the roots of dependency. If he were harmless, why would they panic? Each rebuke became a badge of honor, each punitive measure another confirmation that sovereignty was finally being defended. The captain's charisma grew with every speech, every rally, every declaration. In Pan-African conferences, he was greeted with standing ovations. His words became chants for youth who had grown weary of leaders that spoke softly in foreign tongues, but never raised their own. Traoré spoke of harvests, of soil, of calloused hands sowing dignity instead of debt. He placed dignity above aid, sovereignty above stability, partnership above pity. And yet, amid the cheers, the ovations, and the alliances, one haunting question remained. Sovereignty could inspire, yes, but could it feed? Could it secure? Could it deliver? Behind the applause and the sanctions, the harder truth lingered. Would sovereignty in practice prove to be salvation or another road to suffering? Revolutions ignite hope, but they also unleash storms. In Burkina Faso, the cost of defiance became painfully clear as the years unfolded. For all the fiery speeches and the standing ovations abroad, the reality at home was harsher, colder, and unrelenting. The security situation did not improve. In fact, it worsened. By 2024, militant attacks surged to unprecedented levels. The death toll, which had already been staggering at 3,600 in 2022, climbed above 6,300 in just 2 years. Villages in the north and east were abandoned. Entire stretches of land fell outside government control. Teachers left their classrooms, health workers fled clinics, and traditional chiefs confessed they no longer commanded their people's loyalty because fear had claimed the land. For displaced families, over 2 million Burkinabe, nearly 1 in 10 citizens, the new normal was not home, but camps of canvas and dust, where water was scarce and medicine almost absent. The very policies that elevated Traoré to hero status also left him exposed. By expelling French forces, Burkina Faso tore out one layer of dependency, but left holes in its defenses that Russian assistance could not fill quickly enough. Moscow provided weapons, yes, but building the intelligence networks, logistical chains, and rapid response systems once supplied by Paris would take years. In the meantime, ordinary families were paying the price with their lives. On the economic front, the contradictions grew sharper. Traoré's government renegotiated mining contracts, forcing corporations to leave a larger share of profits within Burkina Faso. Processing facilities were established, and initiatives to promote food self-sufficiency were launched. But the transformation was slow. Foreign investment, particularly from Western capital markets, evaporated almost overnight. International credit dried up. Roads, bridges, and clinics that had once been financed through global lenders stalled. Youth unemployment remained stubbornly high, and for the most educated, the message was clear. Opportunity lay not in Ouagadougou, but across borders. A quiet but steady brain drain began. Doctors, engineers, and teachers left, not because they rejected the revolution, but because pride could not pay wages or guarantee safety for their children. Critics, both at home and abroad, pounced on these failures. They pointed to the numbers, the refugee camps, the stalled economy, the insecurity, as proof that Traoré's defiance was nothing more than rhetoric. They argued that in rejecting traditional allies, he had isolated Burkina Faso, cutting it off from the very networks that might have offered stability. Western commentators painted him as a cautionary tale, a young populist who had confused passion with policy. But Traoré did not retreat. He reframed the hardship not as evidence of failure, but as the cost of freedom. Breaking chains, he told his people, is never painless. He reminded them that every nation which had clawed its way to dignity had endured moments of hunger, fear, and sacrifice. If change were easy, he said, it would have been done already. If sovereignty were cheap, others would have bought it long ago. But sovereignty is priceless, and priceless things demand suffering. For his supporters, these words resonated deeply. They saw their own pain reflected in the nation's struggle, and rather than weakening the movement, the hardship seemed to make it more authentic. After all, if the road were smooth, would it not mean the old system had simply been repainted rather than removed? To them, the very fact that life was harder proved that Traoré was confronting the real foundations of dependency. And so, the question of his legacy grew sharper. Was he to be remembered as the captain who sacrificed his people's stability for an ideal, or as the leader who endured short-term storms to plant the seeds of a future harvest? The world debated, the media speculated, but inside Burkina Faso, the struggle remained visceral. Mothers still searched for food, farmers still prayed for rain, soldiers still buried their brothers. The truth was clear. Revolutions are not judged in months or even years. They are judged in decades. And Traoré's legacy would depend not on slogans, but on whether the sacrifices of today would lead to sovereignty tomorrow. The world now asked, would this Ibrahim Traoré legacy survive the storm or collapse beneath the weight of suffering? No revolution unfolds in isolation. The shockwaves from Ouagadougou were felt not only in the Sahel, but in every capital where Africa's future was weighed against foreign interests. In Addis Ababa, the African Union issued carefully worded statements urging a return to constitutional order. In Abuja, ECOWAS moved more aggressively, threatening sanctions and suspension. Their language echoed familiar concerns: stability, democracy, human rights. Yet, for many Africans, these words rang hollow. because the same organizations had stood silent when resources were siphoned north, and when leaders served external patrons more loyally than their own citizens. Across the Atlantic, Washington sharpened its tone. American officials warned of democratic backsliding and hinted at security risks in a region already plagued by militancy. Reports from think tanks spoke darkly of contagion, the fear that Traoré's defiance might spread, inspiring larger and more strategically vital countries to question the presence of foreign troops and multinational corporations. In Brussels, the European Union imposed targeted sanctions on Burkina Faso and its allies, Mali and Niger, presenting the measures as a defense of democracy. But to many Africans, the pattern was familiar. Praise when leaders obey, punishment when they refuse. Western media, too, adjusted the narrative. Articles that once hailed Traoré as the world's youngest head of state began to frame him, instead, as another African strongman. His speeches on dignity were described as populism. His insistence on sovereignty was painted as authoritarian ambition. The decision to extend the transition to civilian rule until 2029 was portrayed in headlines as proof of power hunger, while the historical context of instability and interference was quietly ignored. Meanwhile, in Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran, the mood was different. Russia presented itself as an ally in arms, offering not only equipment, but a symbolic shield against Western dominance. China sought opportunities in infrastructure and trade, its firms bidding for contracts long monopolized by Europe. Iran, less visible but equally eager, positioned itself as a partner in agriculture and food security. Each of these relationships, however, came with strings, some visible, others hidden. Critics asked whether replacing one set of foreign partners with another truly marked independence, or whether it simply exchanged one chain for a different shackle. Amid these competing forces, Traoré spoke of the long horizon. He reminded his people and his allies abroad that freedom could not be measured in quarterly reports or annual aid budgets. It was a generational mission, a project not of years, but of decades. He called it a vision, not just for Burkina Faso, but for Africa. A vision of sovereignty by the middle of the century, of a continent that charted its own destiny rather than borrowing its script. And so, the question emerged: would this Ibrahim Traoré Vision 2050 be remembered as the dawn of a new African century, or dismissed as another mirage wrapped in foreign flags? The answer would depend not only on Traoré, but on whether a continent long divided could finally march as one. Revolutions are not moments, they are journeys. And the road that stretches before Ibrahim Traoré is neither smooth nor certain. What lies ahead is a battlefield of risks and possibilities, where the harvest of tomorrow depends on the endurance of today. The risks are undeniable. The threat of militant attacks continues to loom large, carving scars into the countryside and pushing millions from their homes. Without stability, even the boldest reforms risk withering before they take root. The economy remains fragile, dependent on gold exports and raw commodities, the very model Traoré has vowed to replace. Foreign investment has slowed, international capital markets remain closed, and infrastructure projects crawl forward under new but limited partnerships. The danger is clear. A nation can raise its flag high, yet still see its fields empty and its youth restless. But alongside the risks, opportunities are visible. For the first time in generations, Burkinabe citizens feel that their government is speaking in their voice. Pride has replaced resignation. The decision to reclaim mining contracts, to demand value-added production, and to invest in agriculture lays the foundation for genuine independence. The alliance of Sahel states, forged with Mali and Niger, offers the potential of collective strength, not only in defense against militants, but in economic integration and shared sovereignty. If sustained, this alliance could grow into a new bloc, one that shifts the balance of Africa's geopolitics. Equally powerful is the cultural dimension. Traoré's speeches, invoking ancestors and traditional values, have revived a sense of continuity often erased by colonial maps. He is not merely fighting for policies, but for identity, reminding his people that their soil has always held the seeds of dignity. This is not a battle for aid or sympathy. It is a struggle to reimagine what it means to be African in the 21st century. Yet revolutions test not only leaders, but nations. The young captain, who rose from the dust of the north, cannot deliver alone. The resilience of Burkina Faso farmers, the ingenuity of its youth, the solidarity of its neighbors, these are the true engines of change. The road ahead is long, but every road begins with steps, and Traoré has already placed his feet on uncharted ground. But seeds take time, and storms will test their roots. Will Burkina Faso's revolution endure the droughts and floods of history, or will it wither before the harvest? The story of Ibrahim Traoré is not just about a young captain who seized power. It is about a nation, and perhaps a continent, daring to break the pattern that has defined African politics for generations. Burkina Faso, landlocked and overlooked, has chosen the harder road, the road of sovereignty. It has chosen to suffer hunger rather than surrender dignity, to endure storms rather than bow to chains. For Traoré, the test is not yet complete. His legacy will not be written in the speeches that stir crowds, but in whether those speeches become schools reopened, farms revived, and homes rebuilt. His critics see only chaos and isolation. His supporters see sacrifice as proof that the revolution is real. History will decide which is true. But already, one thing is undeniable. The name Ibrahim Traoré has become a banner for a generation that refuses to kneel. And the horizon stretches further still. The idea of an Africa unbound by neocolonial dependence, united not by fear, but by pride, is no longer dismissed as fantasy. It has a face, it has a voice, and it has a vision. The Ibrahim Traoré Vision 2050 imagines a continent that owns its destiny, where resources fuel prosperity at home, and sovereignty is not a slogan, but a lived reality. The stakes are immense. If Burkina Faso can prove that independence need not mean isolation, if it can weather the storms and build lasting institutions, then Traoré's legacy may outlive him. He may become the turning point, the moment when Africa stopped waiting for permission and started writing its own script. But if the revolution falters, the old narratives of incapacity will return, and the chains may grow heavier still. So the question remains, not only for Burkina Faso, but for all who watch. If one small nation can choose sovereignty, what stops the rest? If you believe dignity is worth the struggle, do not turn away. Subscribe, share, and walk with us into the story of Africa's tomorrow.